Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of our amazing Equity Conference week. I am Charles Toombs, CFA President. I am about 5'11", medium complexion, bald head with glasses, and I'm wearing a sweater and button-down shirt this morning. We also have day 4 tomorrow, and I want to make sure that all of you attend, where we will have Dr. Luke Wood from San Diego State speaking on race lighting, and we will have Dr. Cecil Eagan speaking on DreamWorks Makes the Team Work. Today, before we get started, we're going to do our usual CFA protocol that is a part of our anti-racism and social justice work. And that means that we will acknowledge the land that we live and work on. We will do a brief grounding in, and we will read our interruption practice statement. Kiara Lee, our events coordinator, will be putting logistical information in chat for all of you to see. And I just want to reemphasize our theme for this week: from here to there, building the social justice bridge, which underscores so much of our work in CFA and in the CSU. We have 4 I don't know what I want to call them, 4 sub-themes that are guiding our work this week. Envisioning radically different futures, and our speaker for today will be addressing some of that. Strategies for co-liberation in hyper-visible labor in the CSU, and care and healing justice. So to get started, I will turn it over to Audrena Redmond, our Director of Anti-Racism and Social Justice Programs, to do our land acknowledgement.
Good morning, all. My name is Audrena Redmond. I am living, working, organizing on the unceded territory of the Tongva peoples here in the Los Angeles Basin. I am an African-American female, beautiful chocolate skin, a lovely smile, and salt and pepper hair, which these days is more salt than pepper. I'm glad to be here with you this morning. Reading our CFA, the California Land Acknowledgement. We want to acknowledge that we gather as the California Faculty Association on the traditional land of the indigenous people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside on the land and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. Acknowledging the land is an important indigenous protocol that we are honoring here today. In that language, thank you, Charles.
Today's session, I am so proud and honored to introduce Dr. Jennifer Eagan. She is the immediate past president of CFA, professor of philosophy and public affairs and administration at CSU East Bay. Dr. Eagan is a professor of philosophy. She has been, I've already said that. She has been a CFA member since 1999. and was past president from 2015 to 2019, and is currently the faculty rights chair at the East Bay chapter. Her academic work plays at the intersection of theory and praxis in the area of feminist philosophy, critical theory, political philosophy, and ethics. And what I want to add to the biography that Jen submitted is that it was under her leadership and because of her courage that we were able to move our organization to an anti-racism and social justice transformation. In the beginning stages, I'm not sure that any of us totally knew what we were doing, but we were committed to making structural change in CFA. And we are here and doing all this important work that's receiving national attention, certainly because of Jen Eagan and her leadership that said, we can do this. In addition, Jen and I served as associate vice presidents for the Council of Presidents. And I just loved working with her. It was such an equal and loving partnership. And I served as vice president under her presidency. So she is my sister, my co-conspirator in this work. Just recently, when we completed our 2 years of bargaining, Jen was just amazing on the bargaining team, bringing her years of expertise and leadership to the work that we did. This morning, Jen is going to speak on the power of visionary fiction. Reflecting on the origin of CFA's anti-racism and social justice journey, and starting from Walidah Imarisha's thesis that, quote, all organizing is science fiction, end of quote, Dr. Eagan will talk about the importance of creating nuanced stories about our history and about our future, and how those stories impact how we structure our work in organizing faculty around anti-racism and social justice. The Q&A function will be open. We encourage you to put questions in there, to also put comments, and to talk about anything that you have to say about how we move and talk about our vision for CFA and the CSU. With that said, I am honored to turn this over to Dr. Jen Eagan. Welcome, Jen, and so good to see you again.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Charles, and thank you so much for that warm introduction. My brother, we've worked together for so long and been through so much, and some of that is our anti-racism work that we began together with so many other folks. I feel like this presentation is going to make me feel old. But thank you, everyone, for joining us here this morning. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Jen Eagan. I'm a cisgender white woman with newly silver hair and white framed cat eye glasses and a black shirt. And I have a lovely lavender equity conference Zoom background behind me. And my pronouns are she and her. And I want to acknowledge that I'm living and working on the unceded land of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. And I want to thank Charles, Audrena, and Sharon, and Kiki, and Shantae, and all of, I'm not gonna name everybody because it's too many people, and all of the organizers of the Equity Conference. This has been so far just a lovely conference. I've learned so much. I have pages of notes written down from the sessions I've been to already. Just so good, so nourishing and enriching. And I know how challenging it is to put together an event for CFA, and doing this on the heels of our contract ratification and during our persisting pandemic. It's just extraordinary work, so that I want to honor. And thank you also for being here today, our ESL translators, Donna and Cheryl, and our captioner, Crystal. I've been watching you work for a few days now, our ESL translators, and I'm just in awe, and I will do my best to speak slowly and clearly. I'm really struck by the threads of this conference that do two things. Like, one is acknowledging our history, both good and bad, and this thread of dreaming. It's in the next two sessions, it's been in the past sessions, it's in Cecil Canton's session on Saturday. That thread is just woven through the entire conference. I don't know if it was entirely intentional or not, but dreaming, envisioning, and thinking about a future that we desire and hopefully deserve. I'm hoping that my talk adds to that thread, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the conference. So today I'm going to talk about the power of visionary fiction, and I'm adopting that term from Adrienne Marie Brown and Walidah Imarisha. And I added this subtitle, how to write your own CFA fan fiction, which I don't know if you're familiar with fan fiction, but you take up characters in a story that's already existing and you weave your own story about it and see where it goes. And you can call it speculative fiction or science fiction or utopic fiction, whatever you want to call it. But I hope that you join me in doing it. And also I'll talk a little bit about why I think you should do so. So I learned from Dr. Ladson Billings yesterday that we use slides to keep ourselves from wandering, which I think is 100% true. So I'm going to share some slides with you. So my talk is in 5 parts. First, I'm going to talk just a little bit about CFA's history as an anti-racist union. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about power and emergent strategy. I'm going to talk about the faculty and who we are in the section that I titled This Is Us. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about how to write visionary CFA fan fiction and add some questions for visioning. And I hope I won't take too long so that we have some time for some Q&A and comments and maybe some tidbits of visioning that you all would like to share. So CFA's history, I was reflecting on our work for this talk and thinking, wow, CFA has a history on anti-racism and social justice, a sizable history, a real track record, which is extraordinary to me. And we learned from Dr. Ladson Billings yesterday that critical race theory is not new and has a history. And we learned from Astra Taylor that debt and jubilee is not new and has a history. And now CFA has this anti-racist history. CFA is an old labor union, especially old labor union for higher ed, starting in 1983. And we're now emerging as an older anti-racist organization. So thinking back on some of our accomplishments, think about our workshops, which began and evolved and continue and multiply. And from some of our legislation, from AB 21, which sought to protect our DACA and undocumented students, to AB 1460, our ethnic studies bill, to our work with SQE on the No Harm Disarm campaign, for real public safety on our campuses. And when we started this work, all of those things seemed unimaginable. An ethnic studies requirement, challenging the police on campus, that seemed ludicrous, outrageous. We would never get there. We would never get our folks to be interested in that stuff. And then we got exceptional service assigned time in the contract, in our last contract. And in the contract we just ratified, the inclusion of the words cultural taxation to describe what that exceptional service assigned time is for in the CBA. And I cannot tell you how difficult it was to get those words into the CBA. It was quite a challenge, but now they are there. Unimaginable futuristic stuff. CFA looks different, talks different, walks different, and takes far greater risks than we used to, all because of the anti-racism and social justice transformation that CFA started, which began because of the vision of the then Council for Affirmative Action under the leadership of Dr. Cecil Canton, who you can see on Saturday, who is also talking about dreaming. And that council, we now know, was writing the visionary fiction that we're living now. And I can't stress that enough, that those ideas that were generated inside that council are now reality. And it was because of the vision that we are here today at this equity conference talking about all the things we're talking about. So a reflection on power. About 4 years ago, and I know this is a walk down memory lane, which I hope will be fruitful. About 4 years ago or so, it feels like a lot longer ago, Audrena and I recorded CFA's first podcast. And I listened back to that podcast, and some of it sounds a little dated to me, realizing how much I've grown and transformed since that podcast. But some of it still really resonates. And one part especially resonated with me, where I talked about my views on power and the strength in the union. And I know power is sometimes an idea that we might feel ambivalent about, because we are a union that resists power, dominant forms of power. But I really like the phrase that Susanna Barkataki used in her session about yoga. She used the phrase equitable power. So I think that's akin to the way I'm talking about power, a life force that doesn't seek to dominate. So in that podcast, I was talking about one of our early anti-racism and social justice principles. We are a strong social justice organization, but we could be even stronger. And I said this: I think that labor unions have traditionally been a place where workers seek strength, and they get that strength through unity with each other. So for the most part, workers have less power and fewer resources than their bosses do. So for any labor union, strength is important. Unions certainly leverage their power through the unity of their members. It's sort of like the organizing image of the bunch of little fish in a school ganging up on the big fish that's usually captioned with the word organize. And that's the image on the slide currently. Some folks might think that engaging in social justice work doesn't seem directly tied to our work as a faculty member, and that it makes us weaker, or it saps our strength, or it distracts us from what we should, quote, really be doing. But I think that it's a very individualistic and white and masculinist way of thinking. Those folks think that if we expend energy on immigrants' rights or Black Lives Matter or a campaign that the students are working on, then we won't have enough power to be able to bargain our contract or enforce our rights. And I think that's the wrong frame for how union energy works. Strength comes from the inclusion of all the little fish and their connection to each other and the way they trust in one another and how they connect their fights to the fight, the big fight, others in the union and beyond the union. That's how we generate energy. This anti-racism work for me includes more fishes and fortifies the connection between them and how we organize together and in solidarity with one another. So all of that still resonates with me, as does this perennial image of the big fish eating the little fish and then the little fish organizing together to chase the big fish. I think this image has stuck around for a long time because it works. And I'm not sure if I knew it at the time, but I was talking about Adrienne Maree Brown's notion of emergent strategy. And I don't know if I had read the book yet or if I was reading the book, and but some synergy was definitely happening there. So schools of fish know how to coordinate their collective efforts automatically. They do that through electrical impulses or bioluminescence. But for us humans, we have to work at it, and we have to work at it pretty hard. And we do that through relationships and language and exchange. And in many ways, it doesn't come naturally to us. And I'm going to say a little something about faculty that I hope you all think are true. I say this about myself, about us as a collective, and you feel free to disagree with me. But in my, what is now 24 years, oh my God, of working with faculty, these are some conclusions I've come to faculty as a group. So continuing on the theme of faculty as fish. This image works for me. I like to think of myself as a fish. Maybe you don't like fish. I'm a water person. I like swimming, so it works for me. But part of Adrienne Maree Brown's notion of emergent strategy is thinking about biomimicry, the way in which the natural world recurs, and those themes recur in our human world. So I think the idea of faculty as fish sort of works. And I'm thinking here of faculty as salmon, who in their organizing work, as in the image on the screen of salmon leaping up a waterfall, going against the stream, I feel like that's what faculty are like when they're organizing. Salmon going against the grain, going against the stream, and right, working against a lot of their own limitations to achieve great things. So some things I found that are true about faculty are, faculty tend to be introverts. They have a tendency to keep to themselves. They gain energy from being alone, which is awesome for academic work and focus and independence and not getting distracted by others. And it can be a strength in organizing, especially when organizing other introverts and for creating solid strategic plans. Often the bread and butter of organizing work is face-to-face organizing, hall walking. And this reminds me of a time when my union sister, Molly Talcott, and I were walking the halls at the Fullerton campus in the lead up to the Fight for Five. And we are both self-described introverts. And we both acknowledged at the time that we had very stunted senses of directions. So we laughed and joked and tripped down the halls while being awkward kids, not being able to find room numbers and struggling against our grain to talk to strangers about really contentious issues. That's a really fond memory for me. And it made me think of us as fish out of water in every sense. But what made that fish out of water experience tolerable was enjoying doing it with a trusted friend, and introverts like being with specific others who understand them. Another thing about faculty is pessimism. Faculty, I think, have a habit, generally speaking, this might not apply to you, have a habit of scanning for negatives. And when you're a defender of rights, this is a necessary skill. I'm guessing that most faculty rights chairs are pessimists. They have that capacity to see the shit rolling down the hill before it's even visible on the horizon. That hypervigilant is a gift that you bring to the collective. And it might seem like wet blanketing to optimists, but it's really important. But optimism is necessary too. I think faculty also tend to have an ungrounded and wishful reliance on facts and evidence. I think sometimes we confuse the work that we do in our academic lives with the work that we need to do for our activism. This amounts to a tendency to count the trees and thinking that it will save the forest. It won't. I fully admit I personally embody all of these traits. And though each of these traits has their virtues, these traits are also obstacles in organizing work. Introversion, not shyness, that's something different, can inhibit us from reaching out to people we don't know because we're conserving our energy for other things. And if you are someone who shares any or all of these traits, we need to move against our own personal current, like the salmon jumping up the waterfall. It's similar to the way that we collectively CFA moves against the current, which in this case is a tsunami of white supremacy in our anti-racism work, and the ways that each of us have had their own personal journey with that larger movement inside CFA. So one way that I move against my own current and do organizing work is through writing, mostly informal, some formal, and writing fiction, which I am not good at and not an expert at, and I'm sure we have folks in the audience who are literature and creative writing people who are much more skilled at this than I am. I find writing fiction is especially liberating in terms of my own limitations. So this quote from Walidah Imarisha, all organizing is science fiction. When organizers imagine a world without poverty, without war, borders, or prisons, that's science fiction. They're moving beyond the boundaries of what is possible or realistic into the realm of what we are being told is impossible. Being able to collectively dream those worlds that we can begin to create these new worlds here. Since we are also in that process, imagining a world without poverty, without war, without borders or prisons, as all of those themes show up in our equity conference. I'm just so thrilled. So I would like to ask folks to indulge me just for a minute to think about what kinds of visionary fictions and what kinds of stories are fruitful for moving against our own currents of introversion and pessimism and the realm of fact. So I'd like to ask folks to nerd out with me for just a minute. So I have two recommendations on writing visionary fiction. One is to tell really nuanced stories. So if you think of yourself in your writing your own hero's journey, or you think of writing about your union's hero journey, That does not mean that you or your union are perfect. Flaws are interesting and they make us multidimensional. In this slide, you see representations of 3 fantasy universes and the collection of characters that inhabit them. And I'll say the one I like the best in a minute. And then we can, all the nerds can argue about that in the Q&A. They all have long histories. Sometimes all these universes are problematic, but they also provide some really good heroes and some interesting dilemmas. One image is of the Star Wars universe, one is of the Marvel universe, and one is of the Star Trek universe. So Star Wars has tons of details, lots of layers, lots of different threads, but it does have a bit of a 2-dimensional notion of good and evil as represented by the light and dark sides of the Force and maybe the problems of that imagery. The Marvel universe has some nifty characters, for sure. Black Panther is awesome. Spider-Man is undeniably popular. But they generally have access to some sort of superpower or access to magic, and not even just access to wealth, but fantastical resources. Thinking of Iron Man here. That's all really fun, but very much out of reach when we're trying to create fiction that applies to our world. I also think the Marvel universe also often shares the simplistic notion of good and evil. But so that leaves us with Star Trek, which is my favorite. Though it is sometimes called out for its colonialist flavor to boldly go and to seek out new life in civilizations, which is fair. But the prime directive of non-interference in those civilizations is the first principle. And the science in Star Trek is pretty plausible, for a distant future. But I mostly like it because the characters, the non-human ones included, tend to be deeply flawed and make mistakes. All of the captains of Star Trek have breached the prime directive because the circumstances they find themselves in are genuinely complicated, and what's right and wrong and good and bad are in question and always contested. Star Trek is as much in the future as it is, and as much out in space as it is, I think, the most like real life and gives us more stories we can use. And I think that makes for better fiction. But you can argue with me on that one later. So in addition to telling nuanced stories, I also think we should recognize that the future is complex. It will be complex. If recent history has taught us anything, it is that the future is really complex and completely unexpected and filled with a million details we didn't foresee. And trying to dig into those details and imagining them makes for good fiction and more instructive organizing tales. So I have 3 examples of what I think of are pretty good, detailed, useful organizing tales. The first is the Watchmen series on HBO, which was fan fiction, inspired by the original Watchmen comic books. It has so many aspirational future details, including the story of how reparations for the Tulsa massacre become real. That was the coolest part, I thought, as well as many dystopic pieces of the future, like about how systemic racism remains alive and well. I think that series, it might be flawed in a lot of ways, but it gets an A+ for details that acknowledge history and carry them forward without jumping to easy solutions. Also, I recommend Kim Stanley Robinson's book, The Ministry of the Future. It's weighty, it's demanding to read. If you can get through it, kudos. But it gives us a map of how to survive and reverse climate change with a cajillion details. It's really extraordinary. And lastly, Octavia Butler's books, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, featured here on the slide, give us a dystopia and a future that is both fantastical and feels very real, with a protagonist in Lauren Olamina, who is both the most amazing person who seems to have ever lived, just the most amazing character, and who is also flawed and confusing and real. So I don't imagine that anyone is going to write a book of CFA fan fiction, but if you did, I'd like it. But if you play around with creating fiction, please try and make it as detailed, complex, and unpredictable as possible. So members of the most recent bargaining team played the headlines game. We all created headlines that we wanted to emerge out of this contract and shared our headlines with each other as a visioning exercise. It was great. And it was great visioning. And I found that digging into the details and writing the story out gave me even more insight on how to get there. And I made some fun predictions too. So I'm going to read you just a little piece of my visioning exercise from, this is pre-bargaining, right, when we were just at the beginning of bargaining. Faculty won more resources for faculty of color, queer faculty, and women faculty in unrepresented fields by making the intent of exceptional service for students explicit in the CBA, made possible by the passing of Prop 16 on November 2020. Over $20 million additional dollars was secured for this fund, making even more assigned time and project-based grants for faculty serving our diverse students even more effective in their work. The CSU will pay for the increase in the exceptional service program with the money it received from President Biden's Build Back Better Racial Justice Grant Program. As Vice President Kamala Harris remarks about the program, we are not playing. If you don't serve BIPOC people, you are not getting a penny, and you better show us how you spend it or we're taking it back. The reparations have begun. Okay, that's what visioning is all about. Is that Kamala Harris's voice? Would she ever say that? No, but guess what? Kamala Harris is now a character in my visionary fiction, so I get to change her any way I would like. And in this visioning, Prop 16 did not pass. There is no President Biden Build Back Better Racial Justice Program. But one of the kernels in this vision is that we did get more money for exceptional service for students, and we got those words cultural taxation into the CBA. So if you have even a little kernel in your fantastic fiction that comes true, it is well worth it. Another piece of my visionary fiction that I wrote for bargaining that I'd like to share with you. CSU faculty parents rejoice over the installation of childcare centers that will serve the kids of faculty, students, and staff on every CSU campus. Parents all over the state came together to make sure that childcare funding was available at workplaces everywhere when the COVID-19 pandemic showed us how much we need quality childcare so parents can work. A massive labor coalition secured the No Child Left Behind for Real Act in the state legislature, which forced all employers to work with their employees to develop childcare provisions. This act was made possible by the political work that CFA and our partners did in the November 2020 election, ensuring that pro-worker, non-corporate Democrats controlled both houses of the state legislature. Nichelle Henderson, LA Community College board member, said of the law, It's time that we all recognize that education starts with how the state treats and takes care of families. Childcare is both an economic and an educational issue, period. The law forced CSU management to negotiate childcare provisions at the bargaining table to great effect. Now, sometimes your visionary fiction can also show you where you still need to go. And that's certainly true here. And as folks know, in our last contract negotiation, we secured a working group to talk about parental rights, resources for parents, more parental leave, childcare centers. So this is something we're still working on. But there are some kernels that in this piece that are true. Nichelle Henderson did win that seat in the LA Community College Board District. She was just running at the time. And we have legislation in the works to secure the parental leave that we did not yet get in the contract. So this is, I think, a piece of visionary fiction that asks us to ways that we live to fight another day for the things that are important. And if we don't get it in one universe, we go back and try and get it in another. So to conclude, I just want to provide us with three questions for visioning that speak to our anti-racism and social justice initiatives. And if you want to use these as writing prompts for yourself at some point, please do. If you want to take these to your chapter and use these as writing prompts to generate some ideas, please do that. But the first question here is the headline exercise. What do you want to be the headlines emerging from CFA's anti-racist work 3 years from now, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 100 years from now, if you want to go really futuristic? What personal obstacles and traits do you need to overcome to be the anti-racist organizer you envision, and how will you overcome them? And lastly, what organizational obstacles does CFA as a whole, or you might just think about your chapter, need to overcome to be the anti-racist organization we envision, and how will we overcome them? Or any prompt you want to think about that will prompt you to write CFA's fan fiction. I invite you all to think along these lines. And if any of you write CFA fan fiction, I would absolutely love to read it. And if you are at the Equity Conference right now, you are the person who should be writing the CFA fan fiction, because you are CFA's future. So thank you. That concludes my remarks. And I very much welcome any visioning that people would like to do in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jen. That took us, I don't know, that was a pathway there. It took us back, and it gives us some questions, some things to think about to move forward. You gave lots of analogies here. I'm trying to think of myself as a fish. I know I was in a little texting chat. Some folks were envisioning themselves as a dolphin and that sort of thing there. What I am particularly struck by is where faculty come from in terms of their organizing, and your discussion of, you know, sort of this introverted world that we often live in. And essentially how we've got to come out of that to really do this organizing to get to the kind of anti-racism and social justice future that we want to see. And that we have to tell these very complicated stories. And you mentioned that the future is complex. I would also like to say that our past is complex as well, and that our personal stories that really talk about our experiences as faculty, just as people, are complex as well. So that when we think about an ARSJ future and it being complex, that means we have a lot of freedom to imagine what it might be. So anyway, I'm struck with that and just sort of really geared up and excited. And I was thinking about your headlines when we were beginning our bargaining, and that we at least got some of that. And that's really great there. I want to actually give our folks an opportunity to engage with you now. So can you please use the Q&A function and ask Jen some questions or write some comments that she can respond to. And let me look and see what we have at this point. We don't have any questions yet. We do have some panelists though, and so I'm going to ask Sharon and some of the folks who are on the panelist list, perhaps Megan or Kevin, do you have any questions to get us started or comments?
I would like to start off here.
Thank you.
I'll turn my camera. Can I turn my camera on? Can't seem to do two things at once here. I was really struck by your description of faculty as salmon. Of course, some people in my side chat said, I'm not a salmon, I'm a dolphin. But I really liked that analogy of how we are trying to move against white supremacy. And I think, you know, we all also recognize at the same time, we are mired in and confounded by white supremacy. There's a constant battle, you know, certainly Du Bois referred to that even for people of color, we struggle with this sense of two-ness, of belonging to the system and also spit out by it, and very conscious of going to the well of our cultures for that reservoir that nourishes us. And so I'm wondering what you think in terms of us moving forward with our anti-racism work, how COVID has really impacted us. The ways that we have been working now really seem to nourish more that introvert orientation. And I'm wondering what you think we can do. I don't know if we're coming out of it or not. I keep expecting it's going to boomerang back and hit us in the face. But, you know, I think we really struggled because, as you mentioned, we draw our strength from our unity. And, you know, maybe, you know, we are living out the Star Trek, you know, Scotty beam me aboard. I am not, you know, a hologram in your room, but I am here in this Zoom room, you know, beamed to you in this way. So if you could just, you know, respond to some of those thoughts. They're not as coherent as I'd like, but maybe after I finish my second cup of coffee.
Oh, I love that, Sharon. Thank you so much. And thank you for extending the water metaphor with wells and reservoirs. I love that. And I did not mean to insult anyone by calling them a salmon. I know that they are not the most attractive fish, but and, you know, feel free in your fan fiction to become any animal you want. And with respect to, you know, I think that sense of belonging that we're missing, you know, it's you know, in the equity conference when we were bargaining over Zoom, you know, you can get touches and tastes of it on Zoom, but you don't get the full nourishment of being together. And I don't know, maybe we are a little bit more like fish with electrical impulses, you know, our bodies in a room together do resonate with each other. And I miss that. And there does have a little sense of, you know, physical disconnection, which maybe even translates into some mental disconnection too, since we're speaking at a distance on all these little screens. And I've been really struck how some faculty have been in need during the pandemic. A lot of faculty have experienced racism, sexism, and other things like that during the pandemic. And if you thought being apart stopped those things, they certainly haven't. But I think it has maybe limited our capacity to be truly supportive of one another. Support over email or Zoom is not the same as a hug. And the kind of really genuine support that we can give our colleagues, just even a sympathetic ear in the hallway, all those things were really missing. And I think it's taken a real toll on a lot of our faculty. And the miraculous thing of, in spite of all of that, we organized to get this contract accomplished, which in these circumstances, I mean, that's a futuristic tale of its own, I think. Thank you, Sharon.
Jen, I have a short one and then a longer question for you. The short one is this: is there a fiction writing group, and this is from Feely, and they would like to join? Do you know anything about that?
No, but maybe we should start one.
Yeah, so
that would be so fun.
Yeah, that's the short one. Okay, the longer one really here is from Megan O'Donnell, or AVP for Lectures North. Jen, can you share your vision for how you see our story in CFA playing out, and what organizational obstacles you see in our path forward as an ARSJ union?
Oh my gosh, that's such a big question. Thank you, Megan, for that question. It's an excellent one. I feel like in preparation for this talk, I spent so much time in memory lane. Maybe I wasn't looking very far forward either. I think figuring out how to emerge from the isolation of the pandemic will take us some time. Some things will be done differently. There's no doubt about it. I look forward to being in person with folks at some point in the future, for certain. I also think so many, in spite of our wins, so many of our challenges remain. Obviously our anti-racism work hasn't touched all corners of our campuses and university, and it hasn't touched it might have touched all of our members, but maybe not all of our members have embraced it yet. And I say yet because I still believe, in spite of my natural pessimism, that we will get everybody eventually. We still have administration management that remains the same and is somehow even more entrenched. I feel like I've seen on my campus, the pandemic has made the administration more authoritarian, because they have this sense that they lost control of us, because now we're in the ether, right? They can't see us. They can't know that we're in our offices during office hours, right? That sense of loss of control has made them more authoritarian. And I think lack of face-to-face contact has made those difficult interactions, whether it's with faculty and administration or faculty and faculty, it's made them sharper and more barbed. It's easier to be meaner to someone when you're not physically with them. And I just think that we're going to have to find a way to reconnect. And the equity conference is a wonderful, I already feel reconnected in so many ways just by being here in the equity conference space. But when we're back together and when we're all back on our campuses together, I think we'll have a lot of relational work to catch up on. And I think that that'll be a challenge. And maybe I haven't thought too much beyond that in our next projects, but they're coming. Thanks, Megan.
Jen, I have another question for you from Vincent Savasco, our Director of Research and Communication. And I'm gonna read it just as he has put it in Q&A. First of all, how dare you? Star Wars is greater than Star Trek. I wonder if you could talk more about getting faculty to not just count the trees. We do things as CFA like release data, but try to do so with context and a call to action. How do we do more to get faculty out of getting lost in the facts, and that the best argument isn't going to be what wins the day or how many may get lost in data as a way to not have these ARSJ conversations?
Yes, thank you, Vincent, for that question. And we'll have to have the Star Wars, Star Trek debate at another time. But thank you. I like thank you for joining me in nerddom. Yeah, getting faculty to not count the trees, and this is coming from our researcher whose job it is to do a lot of accounting and research and puts out our wonderful research that accompanies this conference. I think that third obstacle about getting lost in facts, that faculty tend to, sorry if I've overgeneralized anyone, that faculty tend to get embroiled in. I think it goes back to talking about power. Facts have no power. Facts do not do anything all by themselves. And I know it's like you want them to, you think, but the facts are the facts. And, when we watch the misinformation campaigns, against the existence of climate change and the efficacy of vaccines and the fact that Russia is invading Ukraine, and that they work, those are all examples of how facts do not do anything by themselves. So I think the counter examples help. And I think too, getting people to do visioning work around facts, I think can be powerful. Like, okay, these are the facts. We want this number to move from here to here, right? Like we want to hire more faculty of color. We want that number to move. We want the tenure track ratio to move. All of those excellent things. Ask them, how are they going to make the numbers move? The numbers are the numbers. They're just sitting there. It is our actions that make the numbers move. And how can you use the numbers as information to help people get them to move? Thanks, Vincent.
Jen, this one is kind of coming from me. Well, it is coming from me, but I'm trying to put it into the kind of question. You really, in your talk, said we need to, imagine what we want this future to be. And so I'm thinking about the CSU, and one of the first thoughts, part of my dreaming, is that what would the CSU look like if it was free of systemic racism and sexism, other isms and other phobias? And in keeping with your idea that the future is complex, do you have any thoughts as you sort of dream of a CSU that would be free of racism, et cetera, as I just mentioned? What might that look like in a headline that you might write for 3 to 5 years?
Ooh, some headlines. I think a headline along those lines might be the coalition of Black student centers on every CSU campus has announced that they have received a $1 billion grant for projects on all 23 campuses and a a coalition that will help initiate Black student centers on every campus in the United States. There, that one's grandiose. Right? That one's more focused on students. I think other kinds of headlines are CSU faculty. All CSU faculty have engaged in CFAs interrupting racism workshop. Right, that would be a good headline if it were to be true. I think another one, maybe this is, maybe this one's just too much fun. The Cal State University system, in an effort to spend resources properly on instruction and to hire more faculty, particularly faculty of color, have reduced the numbers of administrators by 20%.
Those were really good. I feel like I put you on the spot there, but those were great.
I have a wish list. It's just there.
And I know, just sort of looking at the reality, and I'm just going to focus on faculty who are part of my lived experience, and that is as a Black faculty member, and sort of thinking about, so I'll just do the 3 years. It may not be a headline, but we have so many departments and colleges on our campuses that have no Black faculty. I would like to see our students have access to Black faculty in all programs and departments. That's sort of a way to sort of envision something. And then there are things you could do to start getting there, the organizing that you talked about that is part of our work. Let me look for other questions here.
Charles, I have a question for Jen.
Yeah, Kevin, go ahead, please. Thank you.
Good morning, Jen, and thank you so much for this. This is so much fun, and your answer to Charles's last question made me dream of a future time when the headline is CFA retires the interruption workshop because it's no longer necessary.
That would be amazing.
To paraphrase Ella Baker, it may be a dream, but we can make it real. So just to nerd out with you a little bit more, I'm with you on Star Trek for sure. Although having seen the original Star Wars in the theater when I was 5 years old, there will always be a place in my heart. But I also want to put in a plug for the deeply weird, deeply wonderful, wide-ranging, also flawed universe of Battlestar Galactica, if for no other reason than for the great, great, great Edward James Olmos. But that's not my question. It's not even a question. It's just a plug. So I'm a huge fan of the three examples you gave of Watchmen. Kim Stanley Robinson's new book is on my list. Maybe I'll get to it over the summer. But Octavia Butler is just remains a hugely important part of my life and my thinking. I think we share that. And so moving away from maybe the dystopian parable of the sower and parable of the talents, she had some other work that was super complicated, but maybe even a little bit more hopeful. And so I want to ask you, if Octavia Butler was going to write fan fiction about CFA, what would it look like?
Oh, I don't feel like I can, but I'm imagining it. And if it were to happen, I would love it so much. Oh my goodness. Oh my God. Well, I think the trajectory of Octavia Butler's science fiction is usually ending up in space. So we'd have to think about how CFA goes intergalactic, and that would be fun. Our destiny is in the stars, so we would have to get there somehow. I was also thinking of in Charles's comment about our histories are complex. I was also thinking moving backwards of Octavia Butler's Kindred, which is time travel backwards into slavery. I mean, which is Kindred is it's a disturbing book, but an interesting book. But I often think of time travel back. If I could be myself now and know what I know now, and then jump back in CFA 15 years and look around, like, how would it feel to me and how would it seem? I feel like it would feel like I would know where we went, so it would be exciting, but I'd also be, thinking like, oh my gosh, we're in a different universe, or 10 years or 5 years. Just, I think that would be amazing. I don't think I can write Octavia Butler's vision for CFA though, but oh, if only, that would be divine.
It was a deeply unfair question, but thanks for taking a stab.
It was a great question.
The CFA spaceship was where my mind was going to.
I'm not sure if it's a question, so I'm going to read it from Terry Prawl, our field staff rep at Stanislaus and Fresno. News. So I think it's one of the comments that, or a vision statement, but I'll read it out loud. News. Revamping of the largest public university system, the CSU will be taking place. The faculty, staff, and students engaged in outreach, education, and actions to reform the ways in which contracts are bargained with all of their represented employees. All bargaining sessions will be made open to any dues-paying union members in good standing. Additionally, all CSU administrators' proposals will have to include a fact-based document that explains why the proposal will help to promote mission.
Oh, that's delightful. Thank you, Terry. I love that. Additionally, fact-based documents were scarce in our last round of bargaining from management.
Okay, and I'm still looking for, do we have any additional questions? We don't at the moment, and I think it's because we have to imagine and envision and think about what a future ARSJ in the CSU and in CFA, what it might look like. So at this point, unless I get another question, I'm going to turn it over to Audrena for a minute to maybe close us out. And what I want to say, though, is I liked all of the science fiction metaphors and fish metaphors and all of those things. But it means that if we want a particular future, we really have to start now. It is about the collective, which Jen has mentioned several times. And I think we have to be real specific and deliberate in thinking about what we want the future to look like. We don't just want it to arrive. We want to have had some part in its making. And I know when I did my opening remarks on the first day of the conference, and I talked about these stories, and I don't know all of your stories, and I want to know more of them because they help us in talking about the kind of future that we really want. In addition, when I gave the little short reading from Alice Walker's Women, it reminds me that those head-ragged generals, those mothers did not know what the future might be like for their children, but they were imagining something big, radical, because these women had no access to a classroom, and yet they knew what their children must have in order to succeed. And we're in many ways no different from that, because we are really trying to imagine a very radically different future. We know that systemic racism in our country has not been alleviated yet. So we want to do all that we can to alleviate it. And we're taking our stab at it. We're doing our work in the CSU. That's a piece of the pie that we really can have impact on. And because we do the work here, it has larger national impact. For instance, our cultural taxation, our inclusion of caste, all of these things are providing a way for other unions, other educational associations, other people to envision a radically different future as well. So Audrena, can I turn it over to you? And everybody, before I do that, let's give Jen the biggest applause that we can. She was fabulous. I'm so honored because of her presence, but more importantly, because she is part of my lived experiences now. I have worked with her. She is inside me as well. So thank you, Jen. And I also would like us to have some big, I don't know how we can do it because, you know, we have to be careful of what we do with members' money. But members, I wish we could just have a celebration that was not a meeting, but we just come back together and hug and love each other. Maybe that time will come soon. As Sharon says, she's not sure if we're moving out of the pandemic. I am hopeful that we are. Audrena?
So Charles, I think Audrena is working on the next session now. So I thought I would come in and just say that we are imagining our future. If we look to the work groups that we have established, we are imagining a future where there is affordable or even free childcare on every campus that our faculty can access as they cannot at this time. That we are imagining a future where we don't have militarized and weaponized police patrolling our hallways and menacing our visitors and guest speakers when they come to campus, or including menacing our new faculty and menacing our students of color and our LGBTQIA+ students, our immigrant students, where we do not allow any militarized, weaponized, and uniformed law enforcement persons, that campuses are free spaces, and where we can model in those spaces our connection with nature, our need to understand how we grow foods without pesticides. There are so many things that we do aspire to. And we have, I would say, as Jen did, we have kernels of these things across our campuses because faculty often are really visionary. Mm-hmm. And I think just because of this introvert character of faculty, we don't always know what each other are doing. So I also want to envision the future where we have that space to sit and talk with each other. We have talking circles where we share our stories, come to see each other's humanity, understand each other's visions, and as well as each other's histories, her stories, our stories, right? I think we are always imagining these things. It's just when we're told, do it now, especially make it like Star Trek, I don't know.
Thank you, Sharon. And I do have another question that I do want to, we have the time that just popped up in Q&A. And before I read that, I just want everyone to know, and it's on our website, we have our way forward. We have all of these things that we want to do that are there in writing for you to look at and for you to start working on your campus. But the question, or it's a question comment here. There's already so much potential, like Zoom, equal holographic communication, and a large part of abolition is imagining what alternatives to carceral violence, might look like. Now, here's the question. If a student faculty needs counseling or other resources, what does that look like as opposed to what it looks like now?
It looks, oh my goodness, yeah, that is a great question. One thing it looks like is counseling center, step one, counseling center staffed with tenure track counselors who are treated like professionals and enough of them. And enough counselors of color, counselors of different identities that match the students. I mean, that's a start. The sky's the limit. I'm sure the Counselors Caucus could come up with a great fan fiction of the counseling centers of the future.
Mhm. And that's so important there in when you move it back to counselors who would come up with what their future might look like. And it's sort of all the individual groups. You have to imagine, what do you want to happen? What should it be like for you? How does your lived and working experiences in the CSU need to be changed? And if you are a counselor, you know better than, let's say, me as a faculty member, what that should look like. So it's all about getting your stories out there and then committed to what that future needs to look like. And that may have been then the last question. So again, we want to thank you so much, Jen, for your really just moving and inspiring presentation.